My name is Scott Schultz, and I'm the president of Schultz & Williams. And it's very nice to have all of you here during your lunch hour. I hope you enjoy your lunch and enjoy what we're going to talk about a little bit today. During the last few months, or I should say few years, it's been a tough time, hasn't it? We've had a completely upside down world that we've all lived in, and the nonprofit or clients, our clients and the nonprofit organizations have stepped it up and done more than ever anticipated to really kind of respond to the multiple crisis that we've been dealing with in terms of COVID and the economic issues, the long overdue awakening of racial injustice, the many things, the political turmoil that we've been seeing, and of course, gun violence. I'm from Buffalo, New York, and it really hurt to see what happened in my hometown the other day. All of these things continue, don't they? And they just kind of pile up on us. And yet, at the same time, the nonprofit sector has to keep moving forward. And during the last couple of years, we've done that, and we've done it with incredible success and courage. But it's not that it hasn't had an effect on everybody. So, a few months into the COVID part of this period of crisis, we had our first Leadership Matters webinar. And we did it because we really wanted people to talk, CEOs, the CEO perspective, to talk about how they were coping with what was going on in the world. And we heard a number of really interesting things about what their concerns were and how they were dealing with them, obviously. And interestingly, the first one that everybody talked about was staff wellness and taking care of their own people, some of whom were home, some of whom were in work as essential workers. And of course, everyone's an essential worker, but there was a sense of some distinction between people that worried CEOs. There were financial issues, fundraising issues, board and staff communications, diversity, equity, inclusion, and partnerships, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we learned a lot from the first group, and we've been keeping touch through a different set of CEOs through this process to hear what kind of progress people are making. We've talked about technology and working remotely and a lot of new services that were being created because of the crisis. And the question was, well, are you going to keep doing those when we're out of it, if we ever do get out of it? And are there new things that you started that you will keep doing? And did you also stop doing things that you probably, will you pick them up or will you let them go? So today, we're going to hear from three excellent CEOs representing different types of organizations, but also different phases of their tenure as chief executive officers and leaders of their organizations. And I'm going to introduce you to them, and each of them will spend a few minutes talking about their experiences right now and how they're coping and what they're seeing in their organizations. And then we'll have some time at the end for some discussion between us. We're very informal here. We're very organic. If you have questions, I have somebody in the other room who's going to capture them and bring them into me, and we'll try to answer them as we go. Excuse me. So our first participant is going to be Cynthia Figueroa. She is the president and CEO of JEVS Human Services here in Philadelphia, where we're based, our hometown. And interestingly, her predecessor was one of the people we had in the very first meeting. So it'll be interesting to weigh where you are today, Cynthia, where Jay was 2.5 years ago. She began in February 2022, so she's new to JEVS, but she's not new to our community, that's for sure. She served as deputy mayor of the city of Philadelphia, providing oversight over a number of departments. She was also the president and CEO of Congreso de Latinos Unidos, and the deputy commissioner of DHS here in Philadelphia. She also knows both sides of the desk as a board member at the Philadelphia Zoo, which, Cynthia, you don't know, that's where I started 1,000 years ago, and as board chair for the United Way. So an incredible resources, experiences to call upon. After Cynthia's done, we're going to ask Dr. Beth Rees to talk about her experience in Washington, D.C., where she's the president of the Washington School for Girls. They've been there since 2017, so pre-pandemic, but then how did the pandemic and how did all these crises impact what you were doing? Because she was just in the process of setting her vision and her plans in place when there was a hiccup. And Dr. Rees has also been on other sides of the desk, in the nonprofit side and the corporate world, and head of school in three places, MBA from the Wharton School. So incredible talent and experience to weigh. And George Batisik, George, first of all, I just want to say that if any of you could take this note down, if you want to read the most incredible article about somebody that I've read in a long time, it's in the Pennsylvania Gazette about George. And it is about his journey that got him to becoming the CEO of the Share Food program, which he joined in 2019. Share Food is the largest food bank in the Philadelphia area and one of the largest in the country. George also had previous CEO stints with the Park Alliance, and just an incredibly rich background of service and disruption. I think, George. I think that I like that. So these are our three panelists, and we will go to them one by one. Cynthia, if you speak first, we would appreciate hearing from you.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott. And I'm so excited to be here with Beth and George and to talk to all of you today. So as Scott mentioned, I have ping-ponged in Philadelphia, 25 years in human services, social service related work. And I did the math so I could sort of figure this out for myself. 9 of those years in government. I have to say government is dog years. And then if you include a pandemic, we need a whole new category. I don't know, like zombie apocalypse, I don't know. But so it's a really important part of that because Scott mentioned that both sides of the table in terms of a board relationship, and we're talking very much from a nonprofit perspective. But I think that one of the things I've said multiple times in my career journey is that and even this goes into the academic and school-based settings, is more leaders who have experience and influence on both sides of the sector or understanding. And so my biggest aha moment is when I first came into government, having run a nonprofit, and in my head running a really great nonprofit, and I thought I understood exclusively what was a priority to government and what you needed to do to be successful and to be a good leader. And then I got into government. I was like, oh, that's not even some of their priorities. So I do think it's helped me both as a nonprofit leader, certainly helped me significantly in government. And part of my job actually for Beth's benefit too is I was responsible for the relationship with the School District of Philadelphia and programs that went into the School District of Philadelphia, as well as my partner in crime, George, and as relates to the pandemic. The office that I ran towards the end of my tenure was developed really on the eve of the pandemic. And that was critical because we basically worked among a very unique team in the city around food distribution. So I bridged this time as an executive of a nonprofit, coming right out of government in probably 2 of the hardest years that I think government officials and leaders have had to lead as it relates to the needs of the most vulnerable communities. So just giving that a little context. In terms of what I do currently right now, I am the CEO of Jev's Human Services. And as was mentioned, Jay Spector, extraordinary leader in Philadelphia, was the CEO for 25 years. He was with the organization over 40 years. So I'm following a legacy leader, and I know that other folks on the call have some history with that. So I think there'll be a good dialogue about that. And it didn't dawn on me, although, and I could guess maybe this is the case for Beth in some instances, but it wasn't until I was introduced for the first time, somebody said 3 first, which I knew at least one of them. I didn't realize all of them, which is that it was the first woman in the agency's entire history, first minority in the agency's entire history, and the first non-Jewish leader in the agency's entire history. So I got a 3-fer in my start, which is amazing and awesome, but it also comes with a tremendous amount of responsibility and pressure and expectations that are put on you by all those communities in ways that you're not even ready for them. And so I'm 3 months in, and nothing difficult or challenging, but cultures are deeply rooted and deeply embedded, and you also have post-COVID, so you have folks that are just, none of us on any given day are behaving as well as we did in 2019. As much as we want to say we've been doing awesome, and I have almost as much optimism as George does, but it's been a tough haul. It's just been a tough haul, and having to be, particularly as a CEO and as a government official, on, just 24/7, and with your adrenaline running, and solving complex, very critical problems, from the moment you wake up until you're headed home to get back online, it's taxing. And I think that part of what CEOs do always is you're the greatest cheerleader. You're the cheerleader for the brand, you're the cheerleader for the staff, you're the cheerleader for the community, in Beth's case, cheerleader for a student body. And that's a hard place to be when there's been so much asked of so many people. So, I can get to some of the things that Scott talked about. And I love that you asked about coping, because I think, I use a lot of humor. I'm a very sarcastic person, but I also very pragmatic. And I learned early on, because I'm a mother of 2 kids, that I chose some very difficult career paths. And even as a CEO, that I had to operate as efficient as I could. And that meant my teams and my staff had to operate as efficient as I could. And I would say a thing that I learned that even heightened that further in the pandemic was how to use existing networks, how to use existing infrastructure and relationships to move mountains, right? So, and George can probably talk about this, but what we pulled off between the government city partnership of the nonprofit community for food distribution for the city of Philadelphia was, amazing. And we were able then also, and I think what's really important about this story is that I don't want to focus too much on my time as being a city official, but Philadelphia is unique, although it happens in other cities, it is ultimately dependent on its nonprofit community. So the nonprofit community is the vehicle by which services are delivered in Philadelphia. Right. And it's also the vehicle by which some of the most complex issues, whether it's gun violence or food insecurity. So what did we do? We literally over a weekend figured out how are we going to feed all the seniors who went to senior centers, every kid who showed up at a public school, and then created way too many food distribution sites and worked with 2 food partners, which George knows, and opened a food distribution warehouse, because why not? Because and it was it was interesting in terms of what did we do that was innovative. Was we used existing infrastructure, needed the nonprofit community to do that, use city's clout to move an agenda and be the microphone, and also figure out how to draw down resources. But it was because of that nonprofit infrastructure and volunteers and supports and the network that Cher brought to the table. is what made it successful. So on the Jeff side, what's been unique coming in post the pandemic is having this perspective, and there are services that ran in its entirety through the pandemic. Scott, I'm going to look to you to make sure you're going to give me a little, tug when I'm going too long or when my time is up. But for those who are not familiar with JEVS, we're a very large human service organization in the region. Philadelphia is our home base, but we have services in Delaware, New Jersey, and all the what we call the collar counties. Those are the 5 surrounding counties in the region. People have said it's very difficult to explain what we do because we do so much. But when I was talking to Scott in preparation, what JEVS does at its root and its core is that we create opportunity, we remove barriers, and we create a better quality of life for individuals. Now that sounds very holistic because it is, because it's everything from education, workforce, behavioral health, career development, vocational tech. That's when it gets to get very clumsy. At the end of the day, we serve the whole person and we remove barriers. And it's really about addressing poverty at its root, which is education and employment at the core to making sure people can lift themselves up. So I'm super excited to be here. George knows I'm a sucker for a challenge. So I went from the city where I ran some really crazy, very difficult programs and used that to really be very thoughtful. So I think what I could say in terms of thinking to the audience is I was very deliberate in my choice to come to JEVS. And part of that was I was deeply committed to Philadelphia. So I didn't want some of the other opportunities that had been presented to itself. This won't come as a surprise to some of the folks listening. I don't know that I'm done with government, but I'm done right now. And I'm making a pretty significant commitment to JEVS because I think there's so much to do here and so much opportunity. And I would just say, like I said, coming into this is that the nonprofit community is so critical to the fabric of all communities. That is where the work happens locally. And the leadership that's needed to influence government, philanthropy, and corporations lives both in our school systems and our nonprofit communities. And it is, I got actually excited about coming back in to that space as a CEO to think about how do we drive the direction, and sort of at an interesting time too, because there'll be a mayoral race. There was a primary this week. We're going to have a new governor. So it's a time of change for our state, and everything is local. And so what happens local is really, really critical. So, we have spent a lot of time with folks who've worked entirely through the pandemic, 24/7. We run residential programs. And then we had those folks who had to come back in, right? That whole return to work, the great resignation, and all the things that have been in front of us through this time. And I would just say that there's a level of resilience at the CEO level and the empathy that's needed to do this work that you have to continue to show up every day to be the best for your employees, because it's very easy to go down that rabbit hole. In a lot of different directions, to get really crazed about what's going on around the latest guideline mandate. Am I doing the right thing? Am I not doing the right thing? And Beth, I can only imagine, can't wait to hear from you from the school side, because I think there's been so many pressure points there. And that's true of anybody who's working on a residential side. And this constant reminder that there is really class and race issues have affected who has had to work every single day through the pandemic and who's had the luxury of working from home. There's some tremendous benefits that have been brought out of the work from home and this hybrid, but I can't be lost on us that not everybody has that luxury. So, I live in that space a lot. I know that Scott will get to some questions, particularly interested in talking about how we continue to show up in this work, given just the racial and social injustice that have escalated in some ways. While there has been a reckoning, there's also overt and very difficult racial and anti-Semitic behaviors and instances that we've seen increase across our nation.
Cynthia, as you came in as a new person, but with a very extensive background in this community and others, how did you take the time to plan for the future while you're putting out fires? A new person, we talked the other day about voice, capturing your voice is different than your predecessor's voice. How did you kind of lay that down for everybody, your staff, your board, and everybody else to say, this is me, here's who I am, and this is, I'm sure that you talked to them about your vision for Jevs even before you took the job, but how do you balance putting that in place with the reality of doing it day to day?
So at the very top, I would just say being very authentic and candid when the incidents or elements would happen that I would say were out of touch with the communities I've been a part of or have represented. But the other thing that I knew coming in was I like to move really, really fast, and I'm kind of a quick learner, and I'm really good at systems, and I'm very good at operations. And I knew that given that there was a legacy leader and the agency wasn't in disarray. So, unlike my previous situations where I came in where I had to completely dismantle and rebuild departments in the city, I didn't have to do that. Maybe we weren't perfect, but there are things that we need to grow and change. And certainly one of those areas is becoming more diverse, being better contact and in true partnership with communities that we serve. So those are big. That it was very different coming in. So I did something I've done a lot of places, which I did these listening tours where I really told people about my story, like my personal story, like why I came to Jevs, why Jevs was the right touch point for me in terms of what we do and my family story and why I'm could have been a product of Jevs. So that they knew that I was here not because I'm trying to build a career ladder, but I was here because I really feel like I'm meant to be here. And then heard from them like this. I mean, so we have a very large, and I think I covered almost 90%. I did over 15 sessions, mostly in person, some virtually, and really asked them, like, what do you think my priority should be? What do you think we need to do right now? What do you think the opportunities are in the future? And tell me what your biggest challenges are. Now, post-pandemic, that was very upfront. Then it's not just me saying, hey, by the way, me, Cynthia, thinks this. Ironically, a lot of the staff that look and sound like me and certainly represent other communities, I had all of their voices. So it was not then just reliant on what I'm saying, seeing, and observing, but what are the staff also experiencing who are on the ground? So that's just a little bit of how I've come in, and it's not always easy. I'll just say that.
Well, we've been talking about a lot about one of the number one issues for every client of ours and nonprofits is stewardship, donor stewardship and engagement. I like to say that donors are like grandparents. They really want to hear from you. But hearing isn't just hearing what you're doing, it's also listening to them. And so you're listening towards a good idea for anyone out there is that people are coming out gradually merging from these COVID caves. And that's why we're doing a lot of strategic planning and campaigns right now. But this requires a not where were we 2 years ago? Where are we now? And where are we going into the future? So I'll just leave that for now and then turn to Dr. Reeves. Beth is the head of school, president of a wonderful school in Washington, D.C., which isn't just going to school every day, is also in the growth mode, a real visionary program that they're doing right now. So Beth, share your story and the school story for us.
Sure. Thank you, Scott. And Cynthia, so much of what you said just resonated with me. Oh my goodness, that was wonderful. So thank you for having me here today. Just a little bit of background on our school, the Washington School for Girls. We are an independent private school for girls in grades 3 through 8, but we are tuition free for our students. So we serve our students completely with scholarship. 100% of our girls receive scholarship to come. And as a result, our school is really driven by philanthropy and supporters who support us. It's important to note that as a model for our school, because it is very different from being a public school or a charter school or even a private school where parents pay tuition. We really are mission driven. We're intended to serve the community of girls that we serve. And that is really what drew me into the school. As Scott noted, my leadership journey actually started at the Washington School for Girls in 2017. And I joined the school I am actually from the Philadelphia area and had been leading a private school up there. I have a whole different background, a corporate background. But when I made the move to education about 15, 17 years ago, to be honest, I never looked back. Just when your heart meets with your work, it really clicks with you in a different way that I didn't really find for myself in the corporate setting. So I am so thrilled to be in education and have really just found my space now, particularly at the Washington School for Girls. When I joined the school in 2017, I did know, as Cynthia noted, that I would be following behind a legacy leader. I don't think I knew exactly what that meant at the time, although, the facts were certainly presented to me. Our school is right now about 25 years old. So when I joined in 2017, it was about 20 years, and we had a founding head of school. So she both founded the school and led the school for 20 years. And she's a Catholic nun, and she's much beloved, larger than life. She's still alive, let me be clear, and involved and engaged with us. But she was a very big personality to follow behind. And probably the most common thing I heard from donors, from our staff, everybody was, boy, you have big shoes to fill. I thought, well, that's an interesting welcome to the community, but okay. My advice, to anybody facing this situation, I thought I had asked questions of the board in particular, like, what is the community's feeling about this transition? Is everybody really ready for a new leader? But I think until you're in it, you maybe don't recognize what it will feel like to be sitting in that seat. Much like Cynthia described, I came in with a listening tour as well, because I did recognize that it was really important to spend the time hearing from the community stakeholders. All of my work is fundamentally done through people at the school. It's teachers in the classrooms, it's administrators, it's done through people. So I needed to hear people, and I needed to gain allies in this process of me actually leading the school. So I took the time and did individual and group meetings with all of our various stakeholder groups and asked the same questions that you noted, Cynthia. I asked, what do you love about the school? What should I not change? Also, what are the immediate priorities that you're thinking of? And this again was pre-COVID, so that wasn't on anybody's horizon at the time, but it really gave me a lot of insight into, because I came in with my own vision. Let me be clear. I came in, I immediately saw things around me. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I can hardly wait to put my stamp on the school. But it doesn't work like that. I needed to just take a moment and hear from the community and have that really match up with where I wanted to take the school. About a year or so in, we did undertake a strategic planning process, which I think was really helpful, because that forces you to be forward thinking. It was working with the board and doing a lot of community engagement around what are our hopes and dreams for the future? Where do we want to be in 5 years? And it's building on where you have been in the past, but it really is grounded in setting the tone for the future. So I'm thankful that the board was really poised and ready to engage in that moment, because that really allowed me to both take what I had been hearing coming into the school and help put it in a planning form for our future planning. As part of that, one of the I feel like great exercises that we went through was reflecting on our mission statement as a school. I think every organization should, every couple of years, turn it over, think about what's working for you. For us in particular, we knew that we wanted to focus on our students in a very positive manner. We wanted to always make sure that us, our supporters, our board of trustees, that everybody always was thinking of our girls as girls who have hopes and dreams. They're young girls, they're grades 3 through 8. That's about 8 years old to 13 years old. And they have families and they live in communities that perhaps have had systemic things that have impeded economic growth, but that's not the fault of the girls, and that doesn't define them either. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about the language that we use to describe our students and how that can be positively brought forward in our mission statement, and did a whole rewrite of our mission statement at that time, and then took it further, and the board supported us in really coming forth with a statement of equity for us as a school. What does it mean when you talk about educational equity? What do those practices look like? The board did a whole review of their bylaws and thought about what does it mean to really look at bylaws with a lens of equity. It was all really great work because this was all sort of pre-pandemic and pre-racial awakening, if you will, summer. So that was my first part of my leadership journey. And then the pandemic came. So then March 2020 came. We were intending to roll out our strategic plan in April of 2020. So immediately the strategic plan kind of set to the side. And it's funny because now I have to sometimes remind myself of what it felt like in that moment in March. We had no idea what we were going to do. We knew we had to have education from our homes to our students in their homes. But we didn't know what that was going to look like. That nobody tells you, there's no binder you pull off the shelf that says, here's how to shift your curriculum. I mean, it's mind-boggling. But we took the time. We had about 2 weeks notice that we were going to shift to remote learning. We knew we needed to make sure that our students all had technology at home. And then once we thought through that, we made sure all the girls had devices. And we also recognized we needed to make sure they had hotspots. Not everybody had access to Wi-Fi consistently. Okay, then once we got through that, then we gave noise canceling headphones. Not everybody had a quiet space in their home. We recognized we needed to do whatever we had to do to have the girls engage with us every single day. Because if a student doesn't show up, when you're in a virtual environment, if they don't show up, you're nowhere. That's the very beginning. If you can't get them to sign on and be with you, then you're nowhere. I feel like I have to just always say, because people do ask me a lot about our experience as a school. We're a very small school. We're a private independent school. We run things our own way, and God bless every school, because, I didn't have 100,000 students to, I don't ever want to criticize any school's response of when they went distance and how they did or did not engage with students. I can only speak to my own school's experience. I know how incredibly hard it was. And I was very thankful that we were able to easily pivot, which we did a lot of pivoting. That was our words during that time was pivot, because we would hear feedback and then we would make a change, and we were able to do that. So when we learned that, the school schedule wasn't working, it was hard for the girls to really be in camera on class you can't do that for 6 hours in a row. It's very hard. So we switched up our school schedule. We made Mondays a social emotional learning day and had Tuesday through Friday to be instructional days. We built in more time for teachers to connect with each other in this format, because it was very isolating for everybody to be, individually teaching. There were just so many different aspects that we did a lot of family surveys, we did teacher surveys, and then when we would get the survey responses, we shift our plan accordingly. That for me as a school leader, honestly, was probably one of the more difficult points, because I like plans. I like forward thinking. I don't want to say that I'm rigid, but I certainly like to see things out. So having to be flexible and adaptable and say, yes, that's exactly how we're going to do it. That was a real challenge, but something that I really did lean into as a leader, because I knew that I didn't have the answers. Not only did I not have all the answers, sometimes I felt like I didn't have any answers. And it's a little bit humbling to have to be in that spot to say, you know what, we're going to figure this out together, because that's how we will continue to make our way through. So for us as a school, we were remote until fall of this year. So from March 2020 all the way until August of 2021, we did complete distance learning, came back on campus this year. Our position, and I have really encouraged us to really take all of the good things that we learned out of distance learning. And there was some good stuff. I mean, Zoom has, completely changed the way we all do things. But our commitment was really to being present with our students this year. We just knew academically we have a lot of ground to cover. So our commitment was being present for this year. And so here we are. We just last weekend celebrated our 25th anniversary with an in-person gala event, which was, it feels like, yay, a whole lot of planning went into that. And on the fundraising side, it has been both a challenge and I would say also a big growth opportunity for us over the past several years to figure out how to step up to communicating and stewarding our donors and supporters at a time when they're used to coming on campus and seeing things in action and really falling in love with our students and seeing all that. How do you mimic that in this kind of environment? So we've done a lot of different things around that to really do donor engagement and stewardship. It feels like it all sort of came together very well in our 25th anniversary, which went well, but we know that the work will continue on making sure that that feels the same as we continue through our upcoming school year. I don't know, Scott, if there's questions.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. Beth, you brought both the creativity and the discipline to see this through. And I'm sure that a lot of communication. I love what you're talking about in terms of the trial and error piece of this. Just kind of quickly, is there anything that specifically that you learned that you're definitely going to include in the future that you wouldn't have had because of the pandemic?
So definitely, I would say, the beauty of technology has really shown us a whole different way of teaching and learning in the school. And so, we continue to rely on the, this sort of format a lot with particularly regarding collaboration with our faculty, but also with the students. As a small school, it allows teachers to really sort of connect student groups in a different way by using the technology together. That is one piece. On the human side, I will say that, just really remembering that, again, we're a school, we're an organization made up of people, and going through a really difficult time like the pandemic reminds you that it impacts all of us so very differently. But yet it's important to find a way to support your entire organization as you navigate through. And to the extent that, of course, we have policies and procedures. And, Cynthia talked a little bit about, for us, we have people who are present and need to be in front of students. So there's not necessarily the flexibility to work from home if you are in charge of a classroom of students. But at the same time, we've really been putting a lot of thought into making sure that our school mission and how we want to be viewed as an employer comes alive for each individual employee.
Great. Well, that's amazing. Well, George, you're going to take us home here. And I just want to say that before you do that, we're talking about Philadelphia here a lot for everybody. You're not all from this area, but any big city went through a lot of the same issues. But I agree with what Cynthia said. We're unique in the nature of the nonprofit world around here. There's really only three things I can think of that really kind of brought me to tears when I've seen it on a screen. Two movies, Rudy and Coda. And the third thing was seeing what was happening as the pandemic went down and seeing the people standing in food lines who that were there for the first time this city reacted quickly to those food lines, to providing distribution of food. There is nothing more essential. And I think that our city did a remarkable job, both at the city level and with Share Food. So George, if you can, tell us a little bit about your experiences, which also
Absolutely.
was interesting, was that you had a legacy leader as well.
Yes. Yeah. And then some. Yeah.
But tell us a little bit about what you've experienced at Share and in the community.
You got it. And then sometime I want to hear which scene in Rudy brought you to tears. I'm interested to hear.
Getting carried off in the shoulder.
Oh yeah. Okay. So yeah, again, my name is George Madison. I'm executive director of the Share Food Program. And I too came in after an amazing, a very unique legacy leader in Stevana Wynn, who was sort of our founding executive director and had been here 31 years. She was recruited up from Appalachia, from Narrows, Virginia, and was a cigarette smoking, whiskey drinking, cussing, amazing lady that ran this organization for a long time. And I actually got to know her when I was with another organization, and would work with her frequently. And then after I had moved on from that organization, became a donor of Share, and for a long time was just kept in touch with Stevana. And knowing her personality, when she sort of suddenly announced she had sort of a family emergency, and so her retirement was somewhat sudden, and I was working as you mentioned, Scott, as executive director of the Philadelphia Parks Alliance at the time, and was the best job prior to here that I had ever had, and had no thoughts, had never even entertained the idea of leaving that position. And when Stevana announced she was retiring, I probably had maybe a little bit different reaction than other folks here. My first reaction was, God bless the sucker that tries to fill her shoes. I wouldn't want to be that person. Just knowing the personality that she had and the way that she ran this organization for such a long time and built such an amazing culture, and knowing how challenging it would be to try to succeed somebody like that. And the job was actually posted for about 30 days or so, and my wife finally said to me, because the job got reposted, and I was getting increasingly concerned. I was like, are they not able to find a candidate? What's going on? And she said, I've never seen you so interested in a position that you're not intending to apply for. Why don't you just send your resume and just have a conversation with them? I ended up sending my resume on, and they called me the next day, the search team. My first reaction was, what's this going to be? But going through that process, I eventually ended up reaching out to Stevana, letting her know what I had done, and talking to some other folks in the region, because I knew the place that Share held in the city of Philadelphia and the importance of this work enduring and Stevana's legacy enduring. And so for me, even knowing the challenges, it was kind of a no-brainer that that this organization was so critical to the infrastructure of the city of Philadelphia, and I kind of saw that come to bear as I got into the role. So first of all, like I said, Stevana retired suddenly, so there wasn't a true transition period. In fact, somebody gave me this book, First 90 Days, which was like out the window as soon as I walked in. I've heard about something called the fuzzy front end, where there's the time before you officially start the position, and sort of getting to make sure you understand your budget documents and really understanding the organization inside and out through your listening tour. I had a little bit different of a situation because we didn't have any kind of succession plan here at Share, and so I kind of ended up prior to even starting at Share officially, splitting my time between the Parks Alliance and doing sort of a 50-50 day as I kind of transitioned into the leadership position. So by the time I started on March 4th of 2019, it was, I kind of was already absorbing much of what was going on and beginning to put some plans in motion. And within a few months, we had a major event happen in Philadelphia where the company that had been managing the National School Lunch Program commodities for something like 40 years, announced also kind of abruptly that they were going out of business, and that there was nobody that could, essentially take on the contract to be able to serve all of these schools, about 795 schools in the Philadelphia area. We had done some other work with them previously, and the state reached out to us and eventually said, can you take this contract on? And so now we are the only nonprofit in the country that actually manages the school lunch program in this way anywhere in the country. And that was sort of our big first step. And then so March 4th of 2020, I was celebrating my 1 year anniversary, and had a nice little cake and everything like that. And we said, should we maybe be social distancing? I've heard a little bit about this thing. It's that. And then March 11th was the day for us that everything changed. That was the day that the NBA shut its season, the European travel ban went into effect. Tom Hanks announced he had COVID, God forbid. And so that was the day when when stuff got real. Let's put it that way. And it was within a few days, if not hours, that Cynthia was calling, and we started working on what the response would look like. And I often think of what Rahm Emanuel said during the 2008 financial collapse, where he said, let no crisis go to waste. And we think a lot about, as we're coming into organizations with legacy leaders, and God willing, organizations have a strategic plan and whatnot. Steve Anna famously would always say, when people asked what her strategic plan was, she would say, "It's all up here, honey." And that was and in many ways it was. And so, when the pandemic hit, it really allowed for us, and a lot of the change management, and I'm not speaking specifically of share, but as overall the hunger relief infrastructure and the anti-poverty infrastructure, and addressing some of the systemic issues that we've had in the city and region for a long time. It gave us the opportunity to take a lot of really bold steps. The work that we did with Cynthia when she was with the city remains some of my proudest work that I've done in my career. And Cynthia, I think undersold just how much work was done in propping up a warehouse in a matter of days that was serving. Correct me if I'm wrong, Cynthia. It was 400 boxes of food to 40 sites twice a week. So 32,000 boxes of food a week going into the hands and getting packed and then delivered to 32,000 people a week in Philadelphia, in addition to all of the other work. So that was 2 days a week. The other 5 days a week, we were doing, all of the other work that needed to be done. But all of this allowed us to sort of take a step back and really think about, like, how did we get here to where this has to be our response, and how are we going to make sure that in the future that we don't end up in a position like this again. And so, some of the things that we've been working on in recent years is how do we strengthen the school lunch network, and seeing what schools had to go through, and Beth, I really appreciate hearing your experiences and knowing how schools and ultimately school children were impacted by the pandemic, not only in learning but also how for many kids they were receiving their breakfasts and lunches, but also thinking about, like, our vulnerable seniors. We had to prop up in a matter of days a home delivery program that we had always was one of those things that we had always dreamed of doing, but now we needed to do it because all of our senior centers and senior high rises closed their doors to us. How do we ensure that all those seniors are still getting their boxes of food? And so now we serve about 2,000 seniors a month through home delivery, through our volunteers, and through a partnership with DoorDash. Those are things that we could have only dreamed of prior to the pandemic. And again, that's where that let no crisis go to waste really comes into play, because we needed to make some of those big changes that we probably wouldn't have been able to make if we didn't look at least a part of the pandemic as a potential opportunity to address some of the core systemic challenges that we have as a society. I'll stop there because I know we only have like 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure folks have time for questions.
I think that you're all demonstrating to me leadership is best defined by crisis, and how do you manage crisis? And you've all done that in different ways. I'm curious that for all of you is, at what moment now do you go, whew, okay, we've been through this, and how do you measure what you've done, and then put a plan? Or maybe it's just up here, George. I learned maybe it's all up here. But how do you then kind of set in motion a plan to sort of take advantage of, like you said, you don't want to waste a good crisis, right? How do you take advantage of that now and push it forward? So what's your process going to be, and who will you bring into your space to help you with that? Cynthia, you first.
Sure. I think that one of the very important pieces is that it was crisis mode, but it was 24/7 crisis mode. For any of the moms on the call, I just say, I felt like it was childbirth the first 3 months of the pandemic. We all survived it. There was not a lot of sleep, and I can't tell you a lot about it, but we all survived it. I just told everybody, I was like, what was like? I was like, it's like when I first became a mom, like, she's 16 now, so we figured it out. But if you ask me about those first few months, I don't know. I didn't know. We didn't know what we're doing. You're using your best intentions and everything your parents taught you to get through it, right? So I would say it's a really important thing for people to give themselves a lot of grace. I use this term a lot right now. It was a very, very difficult time for a very lengthy period of time. And there can't be enough said about the amount of empathy we need to use when we engage with one another. And that everything is not a crisis right now. And I particularly when you transition from managing absolute crisis, and for Beth, on any given day, there could be a crisis. So there are real things that happen, but it's sort of taking a breath so that you're more thoughtful. I would say one of the things that was not helpful about the pandemic that I think we need to sort of step back from was these very quick decision points that had to be made.
Yep.
So we're not in the same place, right? And so allowing yourself time to think through sort of that decision-making process is one that I would encourage folks. And then I think the other thing we learned was like being very decisive and but explaining why, and I think that if anything we should take from the pandemic is that the ability to make hard decisions and have hard conversations, but being very clear about those. I mean, George and I, the other thing I would share is communication was critical. I talked to George probably more than I talked to my own husband, probably during the pandemic on any given day. So it was, and then we got to a point where like we had to maintain communication. So I would just say holding on to that level of communication at all levels, it is important that we don't lose that. So those are just some gems.
Great. Beth, you had the future of these young women in your grasp, making decisions for them and their families. How do you take a pause now and say, here's what we learned? You mentioned the technology piece, but it seems like it's also kind of embracing your school community in a different way.
Yep. Well, one thing for sure, I mentioned that we had done our strategic plan shortly before COVID hit, and it's at when we decided, at the beginning of this school year that we were really going to move forward earnestly with our strategic plan. One of the first things we did was really reflect on it again to say, does this thinking still hold now? Knowing what we know, knowing what we've learned through COVID, is there anything that we would do differently in the plan? Because of, when you think about putting together a plan pre-COVID, the thinking was even way before that. So we really did do good reflection around our future plans to see, does it still hold based on what we know? And the answer is yes. I think our commitment is even deeper to our students and our families as a result of this. we saw the role that we played in their lives during the pandemic. It was incredibly frustrating in the beginning when some of our funders might say, oh, we're only funding essential services now. We're thinking, like, who doesn't think education is essential? Like, let me meet that person. But the reality showed how essential it was. And I think that our students just in general across the country have shown that it's really difficult if you don't keep it going. You had to keep something going for these children during the pandemic. So I think for us, our resolve is even deeper going forward with our students and families, and we're very proud of our ability to continue to do that.
How about you, George? Last chance here to tell us, you don't seem like a person to me, having gotten to know you now, that pauses a lot.
Yeah, but there is a need. I mean, we are preparing now to sort of take I wouldn't say that we're doing the, like, we're not there, right? But we are at a point of sort of taking a step back, going into some deeper strategic planning and taking the lessons that we learned, and thinking about, how do we make sure that we never get there again, right? And how do we make sure that we're going from, essentially the MASH units that we build up to a hospital system, right? Like we want to be able to move from that very temporary emergency response to having something that is there, is impactful and is lasting. I don't actually just keep a lot of books around, but I happen to have this here too. So this is a great book too, Lean Impact, which is all about like taking some ideas and what they call, MVP, minimum viable product, and really thinking about how to innovate in this space, but then like to build something that lasts, right? To build something, I think, and dealing with this with Cynthia, there are a lot of good ideas that are out there, that the challenge for all of us is scaling it up, right? It's building that scalability. And while there, a lot of foundations tend to like the idea of innovation, the reality is we need that innovation, absolutely, but then we need to build on that and make it something that is lasting and impactful. Those 40 sites that we did with Cynthia, right? We need to build on that type of infrastructure to make sure, anybody in our case in the Philadelphia area, has access to what they need.
I think that one of the things that we've seen is that donors, from a fundraising perspective at least, have been really tuned into the people that need their help the most. I think that the philanthropic mindset right now is looking deeper at your organizations. And my advice to everybody out there is hearing these stories is don't assume anyone knows your story. You've been living it and you don't want to relive it. I know that. But what did you learn? And, part of, fundraising and strategic planning is based on storytelling. And I think you got to dig deep down. I'm sure in Beth's case, there's a few families that you served, that you kept going, that didn't have that hotspot, that didn't have the computer, that the parent was hard pressed to make all this work. That's a story. Everything, George, you talk about 400 boxes to 1,000 million places. That's a story, especially now that you're trying to build a new warehouse. You got to remind people what you were dealt with.
Yeah.
And Cynthia, I think that people don't realize JEVS is an organization that serves 35,000 people. It's an amazingly impactful organization that provides care for the neediest of the needy in our community, and we have a community that has profound poverty and other problems. So to all of you, thank you for doing what you do and have done and will do in the future. To all of our clients and friends and colleagues out there, keep it going. Don't hold back. Use this crisis to make your organization better, and don't spare on the empathy. Give yourself a break because we all deserve it. So thank you for attending today. Thank you to the three of you. You guys were wonderful. And everybody else out there, tune into our next webinar. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
You guys.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right.